What time do you have?
3:02.
We'll give it a couple more minutes. Basically, what we're going to be doing is talking about the difference between facilities that are run by people with lived experience and the facilities that are run by people who have degrees and are hired and don't necessarily have experience. And Alona talked the other day about how the system works for the system, funds the system, and in fact, how systems of this nature actually become almost, she didn't use the term contrarian, but I'm going to use them. They're contrary to logic because in fact, the system is supposed to help people. But in fact, the only way for the system to survive and to grow is if people fail. So it's a contrary logic that is really hard for people to believe when we've been sold the story that freedom is our highest value, that we sell freedom as the opportunity for America. It's the great big American dream. It's all this stuff. So we've been sold a bill of goods, if you will. And we've been told all these things are true. And when we find out that it's not, it's really hard and you feel betrayed. So the betrayal and the difficulty of dealing with betrayal is part of the problem that we're dealing with when you start working with people who live and work inside the system. So Shanae, I've asked her to come back after her conversation with us yesterday. And Shanae, as you all know, and if you might just for this recording, give a little tiny summary of how long you've been in the system and stuff. If you can share a little bit about that, that would help us to give, if somebody just stops and listens to this, just this section of the recording. And I don't know if you've got access to your pictures, your mugshots, but I think that might even be useful. But just say, she's got an enormous amount of lived experience in the system as a client. And then she's done all this other stuff as a staff member, as a person who's been trained in the field. And I thought she might be able to give some lived experience of working inside a system with people who have lived experience and working inside systems where they don't have. And she was completely subject to staff who are degreed and qualified and able to do work, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing in the same way. So Shanae, do you want to start? And if you can't get access to that image, I can probably look it up and share it in a little bit.
I can do it kind of while I'm talking, I guess.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me get back to where I can see your faces. Oh, okay.
Hi, welcome, Shanae Kelt. She's also the one of our co-hosts on the I Change Justice podcast. Shanae has been working with us for a very long time and is one of our inspirations because she's this ever-ready buddy who just will not go down. She's courageous. She wants to do the best that she can do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And she just continues to try to work and work and work and work and work. And you have been stunning over the last 13 years that I've known you.
Crazy.
So, yeah, it is crazy.
Hi, Patty. Hi, Frank again. Irene, hi. So just a really short snippet about me. I grew up with my grandparents because my mother and father were drug addicts in and out of jail and prison until I was 15. And then I was dumped on my dad's doorstep, which was a little tiny trailer. And my dad didn't really know what to do with me. So he started doing drugs with me. So I was addicted to drugs from the age of 15 until I was about 24, almost 25. And during that time, about 10 years, I was arrested more than 25 times. I went to treatment 5 times. I went to a 21-day, 28-day, 90-day treatment centers, outpatient treatment, counseling. And every time I would go, most of the time they were not people who were in recovery themselves. They were trained and they just had a heart for helping people. Sometimes there were people that were my case managers that were in recovery. But when you're a case manager and you're working, you cannot cross that boundary and share your personal experiences with your client. I've been a case manager since then. and it's frowned upon to share your experience, which that's what I needed. I needed somebody that would share their story with me so that I knew that they could relate to me, because in my mind, I thought I'm one of the only ones, nobody's been through the stuff I've been through. And so that kept me loaded for a very long time.
So what you're
And
saying is that there's rules and regulations within the system that say you can't be personal.
Yeah,
You can't, I mean,
absolutely.
there's guidelines. You can't say this, you can't say that. You can't hug people. You can't,
Yeah. Yeah. And I just thought of that actually. That's one of the things that I noticed when I started, I'll back up a little bit. So I went to prison. I was sentenced to prison. I went to prison for 4 years, and I was at Washington State Correction Center for Women in Gig Harbor. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me at that time, because it really saved my life. I was overdosing every week, sometimes multiple times a week. And it really gave me an opportunity to pause my life long enough to start noticing my accountability and my value. And once I realized I was valuable, regardless of my decisions I made in my past, then I could be accountable to myself now in the present. So since then, I've, went to Bellingham Work Release, graduated from that. I met Irene and Joy and everybody in about 2009. And I was their first pilot project for a housing program that they started. They took about $1,500, and I was able to get my own apartment. Never had that before. I was enrolled in college. I graduated from Whatcom Community College with a medical assisting degree, also medical billing, medical coding, everything medical. And still there was those barriers, during that time I was working at a nonprofit called Women Care Shelter, and it was a domestic violence shelter. And unbeknownst to me, the executive director was actually the president of what was then called Whatcom Reentry Coalition. And so I didn't know. And so she ended up hiring me full time. I became a case manager, shelter supervisor for these women and children coming out of abusive relationships, also out of addictions, things like that. But while I was working on my degrees, there was usually people were supportive because I openly shared my story. I've always done that. I've always just said, this is where I came from. This is where I plan to go. Are you going to help me? Because if you're not, get out the way. You know what I mean? But like, there were people that were still thinking old ways of thinking. And like, even the executive director of the medical assisting program, she balked at getting me an internship because I was a felon. She was not supportive of me. And she blocked me from getting hired, getting a job. And it was weird because like I was on the dean's list. I mean, I had the 3.6 average GPA. I was a good student. And so that really, every time something like that happened, every time somebody wasn't supportive, even though I have this spirit within me saying, I'm going to do it anyway, regardless of what you think, it still chips away. It chips away at your psyche, your emotions, your self-worth, your value. It starts taking those things that I worked so hard to gain away. And it was frustrating. And I haven't been perfect since I've been out of prison. I have 8 years clean and sober now, but throughout that time, that was 2009, I got out. I relapsed 2 times in the last 17 years. And it was a short period of time because I knew what recovery was, and I knew that I had value and that I could do this life thing. And so I am really passionate about building a RestoreALife center, because now that I have the last 17 years worked as a case manager, worked one-on-one with clients, I was a PCAP advocate at Skagit Recovery Center. I've worked at Whatcom Detox, Compass Health Mental Health Crisis Unit. I've been on the other side trying to give the services as well. And there are so many regulations on us, what you can and can't say to clients, where you can and can't go with clients. It was really difficult, but it opened my eyes to why, when I was trying to get help, why I couldn't relate. And so with the RestoreALife Center, it's more open. Like, I would be able to go in there, share my story directly with a client and get them talking about their story. That's like the first thing. Like, can we get them talking? Because then they gain trust with somebody. Mm-hmm. And also something that was really important is when I was a PCAP advocate caseworker, I was only a parent-child assistance program. It is a grant-based program based out of University of Washington. And I case managed women who were either pregnant and still using drugs, or had had babies born addicted to drugs, or were in the age range with the grant that they could get pregnant and have a child that was born addicted. And that was like my heart. I was pregnant and using before I went to prison. I do have a son that has mild cerebral palsy because of my choices before I went to prison. So that was like really cool that I got to actually help those people. Now, I was only there for 90 days. When I got thrown in that job, I had 13 clients and I only had 2 that were active, that were actually talking to me. In 90 days, I had an 85% client contact. And that was like amazing. I mean, the fact that I got to take them to meetings, I got to get them resources, shoes, clothes, hygiene items. They were actually opening up, talking to me. One day, and this is a very fine example of the system works against us. So one of my clients she had 2 children, an 18-month-old and a 9-month-old, 9 months apart. And she was using cannabis. She had a CPS open case for using methamphetamine, but she had quit and she was just using cannabis off and on. So she was about to get released from CPS. She was doing great for 2 years. She called me up and she said, there's been an accident. My 18-month-old climbed out of his stroller while my cousin was backing up his truck and got pinned between the truck's exhaust and this grassy hill, and they're rushing him to Harborview. And I said, I'm coming to Harborview right now. So I drove to Seattle. I met her at Harborview. CPS is on the phone with her, telling her she needed to leave her child in Seattle and go back to Concrete, Washington, so they could do a well child check on her 9-month-old child who was left at a cousin's during this time because of this crisis, right? And I said, my client is not leaving her child in emergency surgery. If you want to do a well child check, here's the address, go and do your job. And I hung up the phone. And then 2 days later, I was released from my job, fired for insubordination, quote, insubordination. I was doing my job as an advocate for my client and her child. The other child was perfectly safe. In fact, I went to CPS's office and asked for their report and they refused to give it to me. I contacted an attorney. Thank God for that. Thank God I had learned what attorneys can do for you. And luckily he called them up and within 2 weeks, they made me sign paperwork that I wouldn't sue them for letting me go, wrongful termination. They gave me 6 months severance pay. But there's my clients, right? All these clients who just gained trust, they're doing great, they're making right choices, and now I'm gone. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to explain what happened to me. I don't even know if they kept doing the right things. I have no idea. Didn't only hurt them, but I'm an addict in recovery. It hurt me too. I relapsed over losing that job. That was one of my times that I relapsed, and it was a one night thing. And the next day I was in a meeting and it just blew my mind. Like that was one of my first examples that the system works for the system and they don't care about the client at all. And so that is the big reason, like why we need the RestoreALife Center, so we can encompass the entire family unit of someone who is committing a crime. If I had been given the opportunity to look my perpetrator in the eyes when I was 7 years old and have him tell me what I did was wrong and it wasn't your fault, I wouldn't have carried around all that stuff for all them years and doing drugs, self-medicating, thinking I was invaluable. And so I really am a huge advocate for amends, for healing, for all that. And not to say that I would have anything to do with him, just hearing the words, I was wrong. It had nothing to do with you. You are valuable. Those are like simple things to say, it seems, but so hard for the system to realize we can't just keep charging these criminals with crimes, because people don't just be born, I'm going to be a criminal. Some do, let's say a small percentage. Okay, they have some mental health stuff, whatever. But I'm telling you, like, nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to go rob this person today for no apparent reason. You know what I mean? Like there's something else happening in their unit, and it's the nucleus that needs to be healed before anything else can happen. So I have some really quick. Oh, right now I'll show you, I'll turn on my background. My background, I'm in an office. So today, I'll jump forward to today. I am the store manager for a nonprofit thrift store that All the proceeds go to a cat adoption house. I am a PTA president at my daughter's school. I am a Sunday school teacher at my church. I played on a softball team. I work as a case manager for RCC. And I don't know, I do a lot of stuff. I wear a lot of hats.
And she saves a lot of lives, man,
Yeah.
cats and humans.
Yeah. I have one of the coolest things for me is I got a client with RCC back in October last year. She had been homeless and using drugs since she was a child and bounced around house to house. Her mother had her when she was a teenager. And she was looking at getting a new sentence from a crime that happened 3 years ago now. They wanted to charge her. She's been sober for 2 years. She's had a baby since then, who was just an infant. And they wanted to charge her with a 5-year sentence in prison. And we stepped in and we wrote letters to the courts, to the prosecutors, to her public defender, and we were able to make an arrangement for her to have house arrest for 1 year in lieu of 5 years of prison. She is on a methadone program and titrating off methadone right now. She just got her first job ever, like real job in her life at Community Action as an outreach street worker, where she gets to go out and meet people who are homeless and give them resources, talk about addiction. She gets to talk about her recovery. She's giving back again to the community that she lived in for so long, right? Like it's full circle for her. And I just got goosebumps. But she'll be done with house arrest in February next year. And she lives in Anacortes, like that's where I live. And it just so happens she lives here too. So we're in contact almost every day. I give her rides to work. She calls me when something's going on. I'm kind of like her sponsor, if you will, but that is the full circle. That's the restorative justice. And if we can do that with multiple people, it will solve a lot of problems, not just money problems, but also housing crisis. We have all these people in prison with nowhere to go. Well, if they had healed their family unit, they'd have somewhere to go. They would have relationships with people that they could get out to. People would have, seen their value, shared their value, and both ways, vice versa. And so that's really important too. My booking photos, I do have some copies of my arrest photos because I was curious this year. I wanted to see what I looked like. I don't even remember what I looked like when I was out there before I went to prison. And when I got my photos from Skagit County Sheriff's Office, I literally told no one. I didn't tell my husband, which I'll be married 8 years, October 11th. I didn't tell anybody. I got them for at least 3 days because it was really hard for me to look at all these pictures of this person, and I didn't recognize her. I didn't recognize her at all. And if I can pull them up here real quick. I hope I can. Yeah.
Can I relate something that you were talking about back to what just came up in the session earlier today? One of the biggest things that came out of all these people who have been either volunteering or living homeless in the streets in Whatcom County, volunteering with and supporting, the biggest thing that came up is they want community.
Yeah.
They want relationships. They want to be seen as, it's like safety first, dignity first, value, being valued. All the things that you're talking about is exactly what these people in the room. I had 15 people probably in the room.
Yeah.
That was the number one thing. And what they said was they needed community. Like one of the women was talking about how she had one of her colleagues that did get housing after she'd been living out in a tent for a long time. And one of the worst things was once she had her house, she was lonely. She didn't have people to talk to. She didn't have the relationship. And in order to feel safe sleeping in her house, she brought her tent in and pinched the tent inside the house. So it was familiar.
Right.
So she didn't feel so lonely.
So she
couldn't see that she was alone.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about here, Shanae, is exactly what we need to be doing to help people with the RestoreALife Center.
My
So
dad
thank
is
you.
another good example. My dad, I didn't see him for 19 years. I thought he overdosed or something or was in prison. And I found him a year ago. Somebody messaged me in Seattle and said, hey, I think I know where your dad is, because I'd post on Facebook, like, has anybody seen him? Does anybody know him? And my dad lived in Seattle in the jungle for 15 years, and recently 2 years ago got housing. He got on the methadone program. He is now housed in a beautiful skyrise apartment right on Jackson Street in Seattle, overlooking the Union Station. But you know what he does every day? He's on Social Security. I'm like, Dad, what do you do every day? Do you have a hobby? You know, he says, no, I just go fly my sign. He goes on the corner, Dearborn Street, downtown Seattle. Been there for 17 years with his sign, and that's what he does. I mean, and then that's one of those examples of routine, right? It's comfortable, it's safe for him. I won't go to Seattle. I'm scared to go down, but he's out there on the streets all the time, you know, talking to people, and he talks about his faith with people, and you know, but it's just, he's a really good example of that. Like, you can give somebody a house, but they're going to continue certain things because it's comfortable for them.
Unless you give them the nourishment and the support and the new habits and
right. And I don't have that in me for him specifically, because you know, he's so far away and he's stuck in his ways. You know, he's a little crazy, but I mean, so am I. But here, I'll share my screen. I found my pictures. Let's see. There you go. Here's my picture.
We've got a couple of people in the room with me, just so you all know, who are not on screen, but they are listening, which is really awesome. And one of them is going to come around and see what this looks like. Hello.
That's me. Those are all my arrest photos.
Look at this.
From the age of 17 till I was 24. That was probably the worst one there in the middle. I thought, that isn't me. That doesn't even look like me.
It is amazing to look at you. And some of those photos I do recognize, or at least you were still that when I first met you. Let's say that.
Right. It's crazy. I'm like in awe sometimes. There's another one over here. This one, I mean, my bones, look at my bones. I probably weighed less than 100 pounds, you know, and I didn't care. It was just, I can't even tell you. I cried a lot when I looked at these pictures, and I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive my past self for treating my body and my mind and my spirit with no value. And that was the bottom line. I had no value. I didn't think I had anything to give this world. And, you know, because even though I was raised with my grandma and grandpa, probably especially so, they had nothing to do with my dad. And if I messed up or made bad choices, I was always told, you're just acting like your mom and dad. You're just going to turn out like your mom and dad. I mean, they confirmed that I had no value. So I believed that for most of my life. Yeah, until I met Irene, and she was like, what can we do to help you? Which is a different way of saying, we want to help you. You know what I mean? Like, what can we do to help you? It gives me accountability. I don't know. Let me think about that. What can you do to help me? I don't know. You know, that was something my grandparents never asked me that. And that's why that family unit, there's going to be tons of clients who do not have a family unit that's healthy enough to do that. But that's another reason why we use our case management skills and go beyond the client. We case manage the family. I have helped, I'll stop sharing. My client that I'm helping now, her mother, I've helped her mother get signed up with DSHS to be a childcare provider for her daughter. Her also get provider certification to get paid to take care of her own mother who's ill, an elderly woman. And then also her aunt is homeless, living in a car. I fostered one of her dogs. I got her some housing vouchers. I'm not only just treating my client, I'm treating her mother, her grandmother, and her aunt, you know?
And her dog. And her dog.
And her dog.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you're going to dealing with departmental licensing issues. You're dealing with her court navigation issues. You dealt with her electronic home monitoring issues. You dealt with bringing her to Bellingham when she had to go to the sheriff's office to get EHM. Yeah. You have been on the phone with her and your client for hours and hours and hours. And this woman is amazing. I mean, she's absolutely amazing. Here's the thing. She was arrested to go back to jail after she was clean, sober, and on the right path. she didn't even know that the issue that she was being arrested for was something she was involved in.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
And that's because inside the system, they have regulations that they have up to 3 years to charge you for a crime that you were held for investigation for. Up to 3 years. A lot can happen in 3 years. I mean, that just is ridiculous. And then they took her license. On paper, they said, your license is suspended for 99 years. She's never
go figure.
she's never had a license.
Did
She
you
didn't
hear
hurt
that, guys?
nobody.
Yeah.
She didn't hurt
She's
nobody.
Never had a license.
She was too young. She'd never had a driver's license at all. And yet, because the crime was related to a car that somebody else was driving, that she was a passenger in.
Yeah.
They took her license for 99 years. Now, this isn't a
99 years. Yeah, not days.
years. And this is just one such case. We've had another one similar to that. And Shanae has had to deal with stuff like this. And in order to go in and fight the system to get that kind of a thing changed, it takes a lot of work. And that's the kind of stuff. The reason that Shanae is so valuable and lived experience people is so valuable is because if you have lived experience and you have survived the system and you're out and you're able to speak and talk to people, you actually lose the fear of the system.
Mhm.
Like you sort of lose. I mean, it's not that you're not respectful of the system. You're totally respectful. I mean, if anybody is going to be respectful of the system, is somebody like Shanae. I mean, she's respectful of the system, but she also knows when to say, time out. We got a problem here. And we
Yeah.
need to go figure out how to solve it. And then she knows how to talk to people inside the
reminds
system because she lived in there.
Remember, Joy, when I first got my client, I was like, why aren't we talking directly to the prosecutor?
Right.
And so I Googled who was the prosecutor on her case. And then I Googled his name and I pulled up his bio that he has online. And he has a sentence in there that talks about community involvement and restoration and, you know, that kind of thing. So I emailed him and I said, hey, I'm Shanae Kelps. I'm a case manager for a client that's going through your court system right now. I saw in your bio, quote, you wrote, would you please meet with me? And he did. He met with me on Zoom and I got to ask him some questions. And of course, you know, there's things he can't share supposedly. But that's okay. I mean, at least I got a face-to-face. Sometimes that's all it takes is somebody that, like, I'm kind of like Irene. They say like a dog with a bone, right? Like I'm going to get the answers. I'm going to ask questions no matter what I think I can or can't do. If you think you can't do something, well, it's never going to happen. But at least if you try, you know, you can or can't do it. Right. So, yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of stuff. And on my personal side of things, I had 13 felonies and multiple misdemeanors. And when I got out of prison, I had all these fines to pay. And so I had scholarships and grants and student loans. I paid off all my fines with scholarships and grants and student loans while I was in college. And it seemed as though like the system really left me alone, really, you know, as long as I was paying this money. But towards the end, I was like, I've paid 7 times the amount I was originally given on my fines because of interest, right? So in my mind, I'm like, I'm done paying that. Well, recently I entered a lottery through the Civil Survival Project based out of Seattle, and I won a free lawyer. So I have a lawyer right now who is petitioning the court to vacate my juvenile record, seal all my felonies, because it's been 17 years. I haven't been in trouble at all. And because I've paid all my fines. And what that's going to do for me is I'm going to be able to get a passport. I have a daughter who's 6 that I would love to take around the world, right? So like treat normally, like let's go to Canada. Let's, you know, go do all these things. I had to fight Washington State to get licensed as a life insurance producer just this year, and they gave me a probationary license because of my history, which is also unfair. It's 17 years. I haven't embezzled money. I haven't stolen anything. I haven't been loaded. I haven't, you know what I mean? It's like, but I have now this lawyer who's doing all the work. I could do all the work. Obviously, I'm
Mm.
capable of doing all the work, but it is nice to have someone else
Yeah.
attending court, showing up for court hearings, doing all that stuff. And if you can't afford that, if you don't have a car, then who's going to be able to do that? And 100% of people in prison are in poverty. They're all in poverty. So it's like, I don't know. I just don't. I wish that maybe I should be a lawyer. That's why I told Joy, maybe I should be a lawyer.
No, she's more valuable on this side of the fence, helping real people and real clients deal with real stuff.
Yeah.
So Irene wants to say something, Shanae.
Yes.
As far as expunging records and getting your name off the records, I've worked with 3 people now, and what I have right here in Whatcom County, what I have experienced is our name is getting around, actually, because I think we're the only ones in the community that are doing this. And yet I'm just doing it by the seat of my pants because people have asked me, which is kind of my usual.
That's the only way you discover how to do things. is
How to
you have
do
it.
things.
You have to try.
What I have discovered is that this one fellow, I met with him 3 times and we got to a specific point and we finally figured it out that there was one particular number on a particular form that is generated by the system. And if you don't have that particular 7-number code to put on the right paperwork, you can't even start.
Mm.
He had 5 felonies and we had those numbers for 3 of his felonies. And the paperwork that we found those on was generated by the clerk's office.
Mm.
So there were 2 that were absent. So I don't know whether that's housekeeping, and that's a term that the system uses when they don't have everybody's files correct. Or what the issue is. And summer came along and I haven't been able to connect with him again, but here he is gone another 6 months without having his records expunged. And there's no reason to do it more than once because you've got to go to the judge every time you want something done. So my point here is there is no wonder that people don't get their records expunged. And I believe, again, it is deliberate.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is so difficult to navigate the paperwork. You've almost got to be a lawyer to understand it. And like I said, it took me 3 times of meeting with him. And I finally said, oh, that. And actually, then he said, well, that goes here. That's what this is. And so I just want the public to understand that this system is totally set up for failure.
For failure.
And I know that's a really volatile statement. But as long as we try to use common sense, well, why don't we just do this? It just makes sense. Bob, you're going to drive yourself crazy because there is no common sense in this, except if you understand how the system works.
Well, and I want to do a little bit of an intervention in it because some people will then say, oh, but there's all those bad people and
That's
there
right.
are people who have crime and there are people who belong in the system. Yes, there are.
Yes.
We're not saying that.
Just many.
No.
Yeah, but we're not saying that everybody who's working in the system has set up the system to force failure.
No.
We're not saying that either. None of those things is what we're saying. What we're saying is that there are systems set upon systems upon systems upon systems. They have never been. In a computer, you know how fast a computer goes down when you get systems that are cross-wired? And you got to go in and you got to defrag the system, and it can take, you might have to buy a whole new system, but defragging the criminal justice system, when somebody gets caught in it, the amount of civic trauma the civic collision is what I actually ended up calling it. We have a civic collision, you have civic shock, you have civic trauma, and then you have hurt. And then after you have hurt, then you've got all the other emotional stuff and the mess that we have to do. So rebuilding it takes some effort. And that's why Irene Morgan had a vision for the RestoreALife Center in the first place. That's part of why. Shanae, can you take the time, if you don't mind?
Thank you.
I'd actually like to get in and talk to you about the pieces of the system that you're imagining that you're planning, not imagining, you're planning to put them into place. Let's say that we got some funding, we got a house, we got a facility, we got a farm, or we got some place where we could actually start working with the system. Where would you, with the RestoreALife Center vision, where would you start and how would you run it? Can you
Gosh.
give just an idea of what you would do?
So, because I've worked in all these crisis and trauma facilities in the past, I think that it would be really great. My dream would be that when 911 gets a phone call, they assess what type of phone call, what kind of assistance is needed. Anything that is considered low-level crime would be directly deferred to the RALC, where we would have our own unit of folks come out and just do a quick few minutes, like look over, speak with whoever's involved. Potentially it would depend on actually like what's the state of the person or people. But my dream would be like, let's say, for example, someone's super drunk and they're out. Maybe they broke a window in a business or something, you know. We show up, we do this assessment real quick. Obviously, this person's been either under the influence of something, whatever. We take them in, we would drive into a bay unit, which would have like 3 bays, big warehouse style unit, where we would have, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but they have these things, they're called the sanitation trunk or device or whatever. All their belongings would go into this sanitation. It's like a UV sanitizing deal. They put all their belongings in there. They hop in the shower. They get fresh clothes. They get put into a room that has a bed and linens and everything. Somebody meets with them, talks about, you know, what's going on. Maybe we have to wait. Maybe you have to let them sleep it off. They might be erratic, but they're locked in there, right? They're just locked in there. We've tried to converse with them. Maybe they just can't. We wait 24 hours. We go in. These are people like me. I say we, I mean people like me who've been there, been through that, and just try and get an idea what happened, right? And most people, if you can like wait until they're not angry anymore, most people have, you know, they want to tell you what's going on. I mean, most of the time, unless there's an extreme case of mental health, which we would have a unit for that. And they would stay in this, I call it a wet unit. They'd stay in this wet unit for up to 14 days while we are assessing them, detoxing them naturally. Like, I'm not talking about prescribing them medication. I've worked in detox, okay? Detox that's run through the state programs is putting people on medication as soon as possible because then they can charge more money to medicate and everybody's making money. I'm not talking about that. This will be a holistic way. I have seen my dad detox from heroin multiple times without any Suboxone, without any freaking methadone. Okay. I don't know where this all came about, but anyway, this is my dream. So after they get through this wet detox at 14 days, they get transitioned to another section of the hub, which would be a 90-day transition period where they do get a mental health evaluation, a substance abuse evaluation. They are eating nutritious food, not TV dinners. At Detox, we serve our clients TV dinners. Okay? Like what? That is not helping your brain. They get nutritious, fresh foods. They get, you know, an ample amount of water that they have a jug and they're supposed to drink this much water every day because most of the time when I was loaded, I didn't drink water or eat for days and days. And they wonder why you have a mental health case. Well, it's because my nutrition's bad. My health is bad. We do a blood test for diseases, test for, you know, whatever we need. We'd have everybody right there. We'd have mental health, medical, everybody, staff there. We wouldn't be transporting them to Compass Health to get a mental health evaluation. We'd be transporting them to the ER to get evaluated. We would do it ourselves. After 90 days and they've completed the intake process, which would also include some things that Irene has classes and Joy have some classes that are about emotional awareness, about, not the typical stuff. In every treatment facility I went to, they did relapse prevention. They did everything that had to do with the drug. No, we're talking about you. What's with your soul? Let's treat your soul. Like, we have an opportunity for a short period of time to actually try and change the way someone thinks about themselves, not the way they think about the drug, not the way they think about what they did. It's how do you feel about you when you leave? After that 90-day period, if they successfully complete all those things and then they start transition to our apartment complex. We would have 100 units where they would move into an apartment, a studio apartment, and they would start volunteering back at the hub, helping people at the wet unit, detoxing, cleaning up puke, cleaning up poop, doing their part to give back to the same thing that just helped them. And they have this housing already there with classes. Now they're going to work on life skills classes, occupational therapy classes, all those things that come along with the spirit too. Those things keep, they keep doing that. Eventually, once they volunteered enough hours, then we help them transition to volunteering in the community. Let's go volunteer at Salvation Army. Let's go volunteer with these partnerships, this garden, this farm. Like, let's go volunteer and learn something while we're doing that. And that would be part-time. There's this idea that when somebody gets sober and they get out of jail, that if we keep them busy enough, they won't get loaded. It's a lie. I have had to teach myself, and it's one of the hardest things, to teach yourself how to relax, how to be still, and not feel like you have to be busy all the time, doing everything all the time. For me, what works for me is I take a day at home. I don't do anything. I don't get out of my pajamas. I order food. I don't cook. I treat myself. That's my self-care. So teaching people how to do that is like super essential. And I feel like that needs to be part of our programming. And then eventually, once they get money saved up, maybe they get a little part-time job or they enroll in school part-time. Everything should be part-time because the smallest little things can really affect the mental state of somebody trying to get their life together. So just a little baby steps at a time. That means they're building relationships with staff. They're building relationships with people they're volunteering with. We would have boundaries classes. The boundaries classes that I've had in the past were actually really good because I didn't know how to have boundaries and I didn't give them to anyone else either. So I feel like that's a good idea. And then budgeting, right? Same thing. How to budget your money and save to get your own place, right? How to budget your money and save to buy a car, how to pay your fines, pay your bills off. Let's get you out of debt before we transition you out of our housing program. We should be leaving people way better than when they came in. And that means not just sober. I mean, that's easy to do. That's what they do in jail. Now you're, sober. In fact, they drug you while you're in jail. They tried to put me on mental health medication. They tried to push all these drugs on me. And I was like, no, I'm not doing, I don't need that. I need counseling. I need relationships. I know what I need, and it's not drugs. And so that would be my dream. And that housing program, it could last a year. It could last 2 years. It would depend on how we were working with that person and if they were ready. Like, are you ready? That's our job, is to make sure that you feel confident enough that you know you're valuable and that you're ready to now go out. You have no debt anymore. You don't have any fines. You're not on probation. You have a whole clean slate, and you're mentally and spiritually, that you're not going back because you know how valuable you are. That is my idea of, quote, the perfect treatment plan for someone like me. I don't think, this 21-day, 28-day, 90-day thing, we as taxpayers are paying for that. I went 5 times. You know how much it probably cost? Probably like $40,000 every time I went. That's a lot of money that we're wasting giving to the government to not help people. So I have a big dream, but that's
So
what
what's so powerful about that, Shanae, is that when we calculated, Irene and I sat here and she started to calculate how much did it cost the taxpayers to have you go to prison. And at the very, very, very skeleton level, it cost the taxpayers $250,000 to not help you.
That's just for prison housing. That's not
That's it.
including
Yeah.
all the times I went to treatment, my medical insurance. You know what I mean? Like that, I think it's more like $750,000
It
to be
probably is.
fair.
It probably is. We need to
Yeah,
recalculate
just
it, but
for
at the
one
time,
person.
yeah, but at the
Yeah.
time, we didn't know how to even think about it. I mean, we didn't even, all we could think about was the simplest of the simplest of the simplest.
Right.
And
Cost to the taxpayer.
that was just the simple cost.
Yeah.
And then there was additional cost, because since then we've learned the social and the societal cost to the taxpayers for additional cost, the additional cost to the family, the additional, I mean, the loss of money to the taxpayers and to the families and the people is massive.
Mhm.
Now, what we've since then learned is that the income, all those costs are income to corporations that are dominating people and putting them back inside the system, which is why we are so aware that helping to build a system that isn't helping people, that's contrarian economics. That's negative investment as
My
opposed to
husband-
proactive.
My household, our net every year is approximately $90,000 now. I mean,
You're
from-
generating revenue.
from taking it all to giving it, and then also, you know, all the stuff we do with RCC, most of it is done for free. Like I have volunteered my own time and hours, and I don't even know how much money it would have cost us taxpayers if I was a paid caseworker through the state, right? I don't know. I don't even know. I haven't even tried to think about that. But my husband earns around 78,000. He's a welder. My husband also is in recovery. He has 1 day longer sober than I do, or no, I have 1 day longer than him actually. And he was a fisherman, and he used drugs while he was fishing, right out of high school. For 15 years, he was a meth addict. And when I met him, I was on my way back into recovery after my relapse. And I told him, I said, if you want to go to recovery, he's never done it. I said, you have to do it on your own. 2 people can't make it. I've seen it. I have seen people, they get in recovery together and something happens and then they're both out loaded again. And so I went to detox and left him. I left him walking down the street, and I went to detox, and I woke up the next morning and I heard his voice. He had checked into detox. He had 3 weeks, 3 days. I don't remember how long, but a short period of time after we got out of detox, he had emergency triple bypass heart surgery. He thought he had heartburn. I took him to check his blood pressure. It was 202 over 123, and I rushed him to the hospital. And so he spent his first 90 days of recovery in a hospital, recovering from drugs, recovering from heart surgery. He didn't know what he was going to do with himself. He was like, I can't fish anymore. I said, go to school. I had gone to school, go to college. He didn't think he was smart enough. I marched his hiney down to that Bellingham Technical College. He did his assessments. He tested so high, he didn't even have to do prerequisites. He got right into the associate's degree welding program, got his high school diploma at the same time. He's now a welder. He gets paid $34 an hour. Like, this is what this stuff does. I was able to use what I learned to help him succeed. You know what I mean? And we joke now. I'm like, I saved your life. You owe me, you know, when I want something or whatever. But,
You're
but
back.
this is the thing. And so now he does it. You know, he sees people at his job. Maybe he's at work and he sees some guy and he's obviously on drugs. He's like tweaking, looking at doing something with his measuring tape or something. He told me this story, and he's like, dude, are you high? And he's like, whoa, what do you mean? And my husband's like, look, I did it for 15 years straight. Every day I was high. He goes, you don't have to do that. So my husband gets to also help people, you know, and he does it his own way, but he is amazing. We're just, I mean, our lives, we live in Skyline Anacortes. Okay. Like that's expensive, right? You know what we pay for our rent? $1,100. And that's because we have been connected. When you're doing good and you're making good choices, people just wrap their arms around it. It's weird. People you don't even know, they're like, oh yeah, I'll rent to you. This guy wanted to rent to me and my husband because my signature on my email when I replied to his ad for a rental says, stay grateful. Who knew? Who knew that that's what it affects people? Ripples out, ripples out, ripples out.
So the real bottom line of this, Shanae, is that the ideal story that she has for how to do it big, that's the kind of stuff that you can do in any city, anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, it requires understanding the law. It requires how to build nonprofits or how to build membership clubs or groups or whatever it's going to be. Every state's going to be different, of course, but where there's a will, there's a way. And
Absolutely.
there are ways that we can solve the problems that we have. There are ways. You can start with a house. You can start with, a little farm. We could actually build something similar to this on a small acreage with a barn and a house on it, where you could start working with an office space. You can start working to help people. These things can be done. And we've been looking for the right people, the right place, the right time to be able to get it done. Because in Whatcom County with the Restorative Community Coalition, first we had to diagram the problem. Then we had to diagram why the problem existed. And then we had to fight to figure out, to make sure that the problem wasn't going to get worse. And then we've had to fight again to stand up to figure out how the problem wasn't going to get worse when they were still pushing to make it worse. I mean, the conflict and the difficulty that it's taken for us over the last 16 years to understand the difference between reentry from prison and reentry from jail, or reentry from prison and recovery from prison, and recovery from being arrested, and then understanding why the arrests were happening in the first place, and how the trauma of an arrest destroys the family unit and throws the whole family into poverty. So it's been a long time coming to understand how to build the programs that we've got today. But we have programs that are in fact productive and they're useful, and Shanae knows how to run them. We know how to do them. Yes,
want
go
to say
ahead.
one more thing before I go. I just want to add, I have a dear friend of mine. I made some really great friends when I was in prison. I was lucky. I made friends with women who were doing life in prison, some 20 years, some less, but 15 years or more. And these women were actually creating programs inside the prison to support each other. I did a program, it was a workshop called Finding Your Voice, and it was all facilitated by a couple of women who've been there for 15 plus years. And it was amazing. That's probably one of the ways that I figured I can use my voice to share my story, and then, give back to the community that I took from for a very long time.
The bottom line is, the coalition has helped literally hundreds and hundreds of people, and thousands, depending on how you measure the help. But the ripple effect from each one of these stories is each human being has dozens of people in their coming lives that are affected by them. And for every person you help, you create a compassion virus. You help with compassion, with love. You give them tools, you give them equipment by which they can run their lives differently. The whole point here is that the Restorative Community Coalition has a vision, and we have a plan, and we have a small to large vision for how we can do these things. Not only that, in order to fund and support the development of our RestoreALife Center and the Restorative Community Coalition, we've gone out and built business plans for how we could actually fund the development of these programs. Because guess what? A lot of those people coming out of prison went to prison because they were enterprising people. They had passion. They had something, they had a need, they created, they invented, and they got caught doing something wrong, some of them. But guess what? They all want to come back out and do more things. So I really want to thank you, Shano. I know you have to go, and you've got a daughter to pick up. You got business that you got to do. So thank you, Shanae, for coming on board.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
Bye.
welcome.
Have fun.
So what we're talking about is, how do we start small? How do you start in this? This is something that can be done in neighborhoods everywhere. We need to allow people to have permission to know you can go there. There's permission to understand how your system works in your community. You need to have permission to know that what is going on right now is not working. And the best thing that I learned from this morning session is that when things aren't working, anything you're doing better is better.